The wind screamed across the high Wyoming plains, dragging dust and smoke with it like the breath of hell itself. Ash fell from the sky in gray, lazy spirals, carried from the fire below the ridge, a blaze born from dry timber and an angry summer. Colt Mercer reined in his horse at the crest of the hill, the blaze reflecting in his eyes like a memory he couldn't bury. The homestead below was already half-eaten by flame. The barn's roof collapsed inward with a groan and a roar, embers dancing upward like fireflies possessed. Screams had drawn him here, faint and broken on the wind, and now silence threatened to follow. Colt kicked his boots into the gelding's flanks and galloped down, the world turning orange and red around him. He hadn't run toward fire in over a decade, not since the war, not since a different house, a different set of screams, and smoke that smelled of lost love and burned hope. But something in that scream, young, desperate, still clinging to life, pulled him out of himself. The yard was chaos, burning timbers, shattered glass, the stench of scorched hay and hair. He dismounted before the horse had fully stopped and ran, his long coat catching stray sparks. He forced open what remained of the cabin door with his shoulder and stepped into a world of smoke and ruin. Inside, heat pressed against him like a living thing. Furniture burned, walls buckled. He found two bodies near the hearth, man and woman, charred beyond recognition. They'd tried to shield each other, no time to mourn them. From somewhere, under the bed, behind a wall, a whimper. Colt dropped to the floor, coughing hard. His hands found a child, no older than 6, clutching a scorched quilt, soot covering her like a burial shroud. She didn't speak. She only stared up at him with wide, stunned eyes. He scooped her up. She was light as kindling. Half carrying, half shielding her, he stumbled outside just as the roof gave a final groan and collapsed inward, sending sparks soaring. The child didn't cry. She clutched his shirt with shaking fingers and buried her face in his neck. Back on the horse, Colt wrapped her in his duster and rode hard into the night. The fire raged behind them, a cruel beacon for no one. He didn't know her name. She didn't know his. But when they reached the edge of his land and the little girl finally spoke, her voice was brittle as dried grass. They didn't wake up. Colt didn't reply. He just rode on, jaw clenched, the shadows of the past trailing them like wolves. His ranch was little more than a cabin and a tired fence line clawing across a ridge. Once it had meant a new start, a place to forget what the war had taken. Now it was just quiet and cold. But it was standing. That counted for something. He laid the girl, still silent, still staring, on the old sofa. He stoked the fire in the hearth and boiled water, hands moving with muscle memory. When she didn't eat, he left the stew beside her and sat by the fire, not asking questions. That night she didn't sleep. Neither did he. Come morning, the girl was still there, eyes locked on the dancing flames like they might consume her too. Colt found her shoes near the hearth, one melted, the other barely whole. He left a fresh pair of socks beside her, rough-stitched but warm. The days that followed were wordless and slow. She followed him outside but never asked to ride. She watched him mend fences, feed horses, clear brush. Her hair was singed short in places. Her hands, when he finally got a look, were blistered. Colt didn't press her. He knew silence like an old friend. He wore it like a coat, just like the scars, under his shirt and the ones that wouldn't fade from his dreams. He only learned her name by accident. A week later, when a letter arrived addressed to her father, John Callahan. Colt opened it, felt a pang of guilt, and set it aside. On the back was a note in a child's handwriting. "This is for Pa. I drew it. Josie." Josie. She never asked about the fire. But sometimes, when he was splitting logs or brushing down the horses, he'd catch her staring at the smoke curling from the chimney, lips parted like she might scream again but couldn't. Winter came early that year, clawing through the land like a thief. One night, a blizzard rolled down from the mountains, swallowing the stars. The roof groaned under the weight. Cold bit deep into the walls. The stove began to fail. The chimney clogged. Colt tried to repair it, hands raw and shaking, but the ladder slipped on ice and he fell hard, wrenching his leg. He cursed, limped back inside, and collapsed into the chair. Josie was there before he could rise again. She pulled the splint tight against his calf with practiced, careful hands. He blinked. "Where'd you learn that?" She didn't answer. Just tucked a blanket over his leg and returned to the fire. The next morning, she was gone. Panic took him harder than any bullet. He stumbled out, rifle in hand, teeth clenched. Tracks in the snow led down the hill, small, determined feet. He followed them, breath ragged in the cold, until he saw her. She had gone to the river to break ice. Bucket beside her, hands blue with cold. Colt didn't speak. He knelt beside her, took the bucket, and gently pulled her into his coat. She didn't resist. Back at the cabin, he made hot tea. She sat across from him, watching the steam rise. Then, finally, she spoke again. "My ma played the fiddle." Colt nodded. "Mine too." Josie looked down. "They said the war would stay. Away from here." He didn't reply. He just stared at the fire with her. As the months passed, a quiet rhythm returned. Josie learned how to feed chickens, how to throw hay. She didn't smile much, but she didn't cry either. And when the coyotes came down from the ridge one night, it was Josie who woke Colt, rifle in hand. She missed her shot, but just barely. Afterward, as they buried one of the goats the coyotes had taken, Colt said, "Not bad for your first shot." She looked up at him, cheeks red from the cold. "Can you teach me more?" He nodded. "We'll start tomorrow." That night she sat by the fire with a notebook, drawing. Not flames, not death. A horse running across a field. Her lines were rough, but they held life. Spring finally cracked winter's back with a thunderstorm so fierce it split one of the fence posts clean down the middle. Rain lashed the land. Lightning burned a tree on the western edge of the property. Colt grabbed his tools, but Josie was ahead of him. They worked together beneath the storm, Colt limping, Josie tying fence wire with raw determination. She didn't flinch at thunder. She didn't speak either, but her eyes burned with purpose. When the last nail was hammered in and the fence held, Colt looked down at her. "Your ma would have been proud." Josie looked away, blinking fast. "You think?" "I know." Later that week, Colt rode into town for supplies, leaving Josie behind for the first time. It made his chest tight, leaving her alone. But she insisted. "You taught me to shoot," she said. "I can handle it." When he returned, the cabin was still standing. A rabbit, skinned and cleaned, lay near the fire. Josie was brushing down the mare, humming a tune under her breath, something faint and old. It was the first time he saw her smile. Years passed in days. That's how it felt. One season melting into the next. But time, like the land, never stayed still. One morning, Colt found her standing at the edge of the property, staring down the hill where the smoke had once risen. She was taller now, stronger. She didn't tremble anymore when the wind howled. "I want to go," she said. He knew it was coming. He just hadn't wanted it to come from her. "You'll do well," he said. "I want to learn, make something of myself. You already have." She looked up at him, face hard to read. "Will you be okay?" He wanted to lie. He wanted to say yes, but the truth clung to his throat like dust. "I'll manage," he said. "Always have." Josie nodded. Then she reached into her pocket and pressed something into his hand. It was a small horse carved from driftwood, rough around the edges but steady, just like her. "I made it for you," she said. "So you don't forget." "I won't." And he never did. She rode off that morning, her back straight, rifle at her side. The wind caught her coat as she crested the ridge, and then she was gone. Colt stood there for a long time, the carved horse clenched in his hand. The ranch behind him groaned in the wind. The fire in the hearth still burned. But something colder settled into his bones. He didn't know if she'd come back, but he knew he'd wait. The sun bore down on the parched earth like a judgment. Colt Mercer stood at the edge of his ranch, staring out over dying pasture land and skeletal cattle. The well had been coughing up dust for 3 days. No rain for weeks. The wind, once a friend, now carried whispers of ruin. He leaned on his cane, an unwelcome legacy of that blizzard fall years ago, and spat into the dirt. It hissed, vanishing before it even touched ground. He hadn't heard from Josie in over 5 years. Not a letter. Not a word. He never expected her to stay gone so long, but she'd been chasing something bigger than this patch of earth. She was chasing justice. Or perhaps she was chasing herself. Colt hadn't chased anything in a long while. His days had grown small. Feed the animals, mend the fences, stretch the dwindling money. He worked with slow, deliberate motions now. Everything he did carried the weight of old pain and older silence. The town, once 2 days' ride, now sat within earshot thanks to the new railway. Change had arrived on steel wheels and brought with it men who spoke fast and smelled of money. They wanted the land, not the ranch, just the acres. Some wanted to build. Others wanted to drill. They all saw dollar signs. Colt saw bones. 3 times they'd come with offers. Once they brought a deed and a smirk. The man wore a bowler hat and had soft hands. Colt sent him off his porch with a shotgun blast in the dirt to help him think straighter. But time wasn't on Colt's side. A week ago, the bank delivered a final notice. The mortgage, which he'd refinanced during the drought, had been sold to an out-of-state firm. He had 60 days before they'd come to seize it. And this time it wasn't a man in a hat. It was the law. He hadn't told anyone. There was no one to tell. At night, he sat by the hearth with the driftwood horse Josie had carved. Its rough edges had worn smooth over the years. He would turn it in his hands and stare into the fire, wondering where she was. Wondering if she remembered. One evening just before sundown, a dust trail rose on the horizon. He squinted into the light. A single rider. Tall, hat tipped low, coat snapping in the wind. As the figure drew closer, something in the gait of the horse, strong, measured, made his breath catch. The rider stopped just beyond the gate and dismounted. Long legs hit the ground with purpose. A silver star gleamed at her chest. Sheriff. The coat parted just enough to reveal a holstered Colt Navy revolver and the glint of a badge too polished to be new. She took a few steps forward before lifting her hat. Josie. Older now. Hardened. Her face was the same, those eyes that once stared silently into a fire. But they were colder. Sharper. A scar ran from the edge of her right brow down to her cheekbone, faint but real. Colt didn't move. Couldn't. For a long time, neither spoke. Then she broke the silence. Heard you were in trouble, old man. He cleared his throat. I ain't old. Just seasoned. She smiled. Barely. Seasoned and about to lose this place if the talk in town's true. He looked away. I'm managing. No, you're not. Her tone wasn't cruel, just factual. She stepped up onto the porch and stood in front of him like she belonged there. And for a moment the years unraveled. Colt finally gestured toward the door. You thirsty? I could use a drink. Inside not much had changed. The same potbelly stove, the same worn table. Josie's old sketches still hung on the wall. She ran a finger across the edge of one. You kept these? They're yours. She sat, her revolver creaking against the chair as she leaned back. I've seen what happens when men like the one circling this place get what they want. They poison the land and leave behind ghosts. Colt poured her a glass of water, watching her face carefully. You didn't come here for memories. I came because a man named Cyrus Thatcher now owns your mortgage. Colt froze. The name meant nothing to him, but the weight behind it was clear. He's worse than most. Runs the law from behind a desk. Hires men to do the dirty work. He's already bled half the valley dry. You're next. And you came to save me? She shook her head. I came to stop him. He studied her. You can't do it alone. I've got the badge, the authority, Colt grunted. That never meant much out here. It does now. They spent that night talking. Not about the fire. Not about the lost years. Just the facts. Thatcher's men had begun forcing ranchers off their land, torching barns, rustling cattle, bribing deputies. Josie had been working to gather evidence, but no one in town would speak on record. They were too scared. She needed a win. A case she could make stick. Colt's land was the bait. He didn't like the idea. He didn't like being a pawn in someone else's fight. But when she looked at him, really looked, he saw something else. Guilt, determination, maybe even love. He agreed, reluctantly. The next few days moved fast. Josie set up watch rotations at the edges of the property. She placed hidden markers and covered the trails with brush. She trained Colt on how to signal if someone approached. She treated the ranch like a war zone, and it was. 2 nights later, Colt woke to the scent of smoke, again, but this time it wasn't the cabin. It was the western field. He limped outside, rifle in hand, heart slamming. Flames licked the tall grass near the fence line. A distraction. Josie was already there, her revolver drawn, eyes scanning the shadows. They're trying to draw us out. Then what? Then they come in from the back. As if on cue, gunshots cracked through the darkness. One struck, the porch post near Colt's shoulder splintering wood. He ducked, fired back into the black, heard a grunt and then silence. Josie moved like lightning, taking cover behind the trough, her shots sharp and surgical. She wasn't guessing. She knew where they'd be. One man tried to climb the fence. She dropped him with a shot to the leg. Another charged through the brush, screaming. Colt nailed him in the side, the rifle's kick rattling his teeth. When it was over, 3 men lay wounded. 1 dead. Josie knelt beside the nearest one, twisting his arm behind his back. You tell Thatcher this ranch ain't his, and next time I won't be aiming for knees. The man groaned but nodded. She let him crawl away. Dawn crept over the hills, slow and red, casting long shadows across the scorched field. Colt stood beside her, breathing hard. You always this good? She didn't smile. I had good teachers. They buried the dead man behind the barn near the sycamore. No name, just a stone. Later that afternoon, a letter arrived. From Thatcher. It was short and elegant. You've made your stand. Now I'll make mine. Josie crumpled it in her hand. He's coming. I figured. They both knew what it meant. No more hired guns, no more games. The next time, it would be final. Colt stood at the porch watching the horizon. Why'd you really come back? She didn't answer right away. Then she said, because this land saved me once, and because I couldn't live with myself if I let it burn again. He turned to her. For the first time in years, his voice cracked. I missed you, girl. Josie looked away, jaw tight. I missed you too. As night fell, the wind rose again, curling through the grass with a low moan. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled. They would come again. And next time, it would be worse. But they would be ready. The wind howled through the canyon, carrying with it the scent of impending violence. Colt stood at the edge of his porch, eyes scanning the horizon, the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future pressing heavily on his shoulders. Josie, now a figure of authority and resilience, stood beside him, her badge gleaming in the fading light. The ranch, once a symbol of hope and refuge, had become a battleground. The recent attack had left scars, both physical and emotional. Fences were broken, the land scorched and the air thick with tension. Colt's injuries, though tended to, served as a constant reminder of their vulnerability. Josie moved with purpose, her every action calculated and deliberate. She had taken charge, organizing defenses, setting traps, and rallying the few allies they had left. Her transformation from the orphaned girl to the determined sheriff was evident in every decision she made. One evening, as they sat by the fire, The weight of their shared history hung between them. Colt broke the silence, his voice tinged with both pride and sorrow. "You've become quite the force, Josie." She looked into the flames, memories flickering in her eyes. "I had to. The world doesn't wait for anyone." Their conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of hooves. A lone rider approached, cloaked in shadows. As he drew nearer, the firelight revealed a familiar face. Elias, a Native American warrior and Colt's old ally. His presence was both a comfort and a harbinger of the storm to come. Elias dismounted, his expression grave. "Thatcher's men are gathering. They're planning a final assault." The trio convened, strategizing late into the night. They knew the odds were against them, but surrender was not an option. Every corner of the ranch was fortified, every ally called upon. The land that had once been their sanctuary was now their fortress. As dawn broke, the horizon darkened with the approach of Thatcher's forces. The battle that ensued was fierce and unrelenting. Gunfire echoed through the valley, mingling with the cries of the wounded and the roar of flames. Josie fought with unwavering determination, her every move a testament to her growth and resilience. Colt, despite his injuries, stood firm, defending the land he had poured his soul into. Elias moved with the grace and precision of a seasoned warrior, his arrows finding their marks with deadly accuracy. As the dust settled, the ranch bore the scars of the conflict, but it stood unbroken. Thatcher's forces, though formidable, had been repelled. The victory was hard won and the cost was high. In the aftermath, as they tended to the wounded and surveyed the damage, a sense of solemn triumph filled the air. Josie approached Colt, her eyes reflecting both relief and determination. "We did it, but the fight isn't over." Colt nodded, the weight of leadership settling upon him once more. "No, it's just begun." Their bond, forged in fire and tested by adversity, had emerged stronger than ever. Together they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, united by a shared purpose and an unbreakable spirit. The morning after the battle, the air was thick with the scent of burnt earth and sweat. Colt stood at the edge of the valley, watching the sun climb slowly, casting a pale light over the wreckage of what had been their home. The ranch was still standing, but it was scarred. Ruins of charred wood and broken fences littered the land. The stench of gunpowder clung to his skin, and the ache in his body was a reminder of the fight they had just won. But there was little relief in victory. The true battle had only just begun. Josie appeared beside him, her face as resolute as ever, but there was a flicker of weariness in her eyes. Her hands, usually steady, trembled slightly as she gripped her rifle. Despite her outward strength, Colt could see the weight she carried, the responsibility, the burden of leadership, and the personal toll the violence had taken on her. "We did what we had to do," she said, her voice flat, as if stating the obvious. But Colt could hear the tension beneath the words. She was trying to convince herself more than him. "We did," he replied. "But they'll come again." "I know," she said, glancing toward the distant ridge where the smoke still lingered from the night's fight. "Thatcher's not a man to let things go." "No, he's not." Colt's voice was rough with conviction. He hadn't been able to kill Thatcher's men, but he had made sure they understood the cost of coming after him. The land was his, and he'd die to defend it. But Thatcher wouldn't be content with just a few dead men. He was a predator, and he would circle back when he was ready. Josie paused, her expression hardening. "I'm not going to let him take it from you. Not again." The sincerity in her words struck him like a punch to the gut. He wasn't sure if she meant the land or if she meant him. Either way, he had a feeling that this was the last time they'd have such a conversation. They were tied to the land, and it had always been their bond. But that bond was fragile, tested by time and loss. Yet, standing here side by side, he realized that something had shifted. There was more between them now, something stronger than the grief of their shared past. There was trust, earned through the harshest of trials, a bond forged in the fires of survival and now tempered by the harsh reality that they were in this together. I know you won't, Colt replied finally, his voice thick with emotion he hadn't expected to feel. But we're going to need more than words. We need to make sure this place stands. Josie's gaze lingered on him, then softened. We will. But I'm not doing this just for the land. I'm doing it for us. The silence between them stretched, filled with the weight of things left unsaid. Then, without another word, Josie turned away, moving toward the barn. Colt followed, the heat of the day rising around him, but his mind was a storm. They gathered, what little they had left, rifles, ammunition, and the few supplies they could spare. The remaining men from the skirmish had taken refuge in the lower fields, nursing their wounds. But it was clear they couldn't hold the line much longer. Elias, their unlikely ally, had disappeared into the hills again. His methods were mysterious, but Colt had long come to trust the quiet warrior. If anyone could provide them with the edge they needed, it was Elias. As night fell, they gathered in the barn. The flickering light from the lanterns cast long shadows across their faces, each marked with exhaustion and fear. Josie stood at the head of the makeshift table, her sharp eyes scanning the faces of the few men who remained. The other ranchers had either fallen in battle or fled, leaving behind only the desperate, the wounded, and those who had no place left to go. We're not getting through this unless we work together, Josie said, her voice clear and commanding. Thatcher's men will come. They'll bring more, and they'll be looking to finish what they started. We need to be ready. The men nodded, their faces grim. The reality of their situation was becoming clearer with each passing moment. What? About reinforcements? One of the ranchers asked, his voice weak. You think we can get any support? Josie hesitated, her gaze flicking to Colt. The question had been asked before, but the answer was always the same. There was no one left to call. The settlers were too scattered. The lawmen too far away. They were alone. We're on our own, she said finally. We hold the line. If we survive the night, we'll figure out the next move. There was no denying the truth in her words. The coming hours would decide everything. The night stretched on, heavy with the anticipation of an attack. Colt lay awake, his body aching, his mind running through every possible outcome. He could hear the wind whipping through the cracks in the barn's walls, a constant reminder of how fragile their defenses were. The ranch wasn't a fortress. It was just a place they had fought to keep, and it wasn't enough to guarantee their survival. Josie moved quietly through the barn, checking on the men, making sure everything was ready. Colt watched her in the dim light, his heart heavy. He knew she carried a burden she wouldn't speak of, something far darker than the fire they had fought the night before. Hours later, the first sound of hooves reached them, a slow, deliberate pace. Josie's eyes flicked to Colt. He nodded, signaling the men to be ready. A few minutes passed, then another set of hooves, then a third. They're coming, Colt muttered. Josie didn't respond. Instead, she stood tall, her hand on her revolver. She had become someone else entirely, someone who could lead and command with the same strength she once used to survive. It was a strength Colt admired. As the first rider appeared from the mist, Colt's pulse quickened. It wasn't Thatcher, not yet. It was a scout, one of his men, a face Colt recognized but couldn't place. The rider approached cautiously, and Colt stepped forward, rifle ready. I wouldn't come any closer, Colt said coldly, unless you want your last breath to be here. The rider froze, eyes flicking toward the rifle in Colt's hands. For a moment it seemed as if the standoff would last forever. Then the rider dismounted, raising his hands in surrender. We're here for Thatcher. We've got orders to take you out. The man spat. His words were sharp, but his fear was evident. But you got a chance. Thatcher's coming. He's bringing everything. I'll take that chance, Colt said, his voice low and determined. Tell him to come. The rider hesitated, then mounted his horse, galloping off, into the dark. Colt turned to Josie. We've got no choice now. He's coming for us. Josie nodded, her face grim. We fight. We stand together. And then, the world erupted. The night was alive with the roar of gunfire and the sound of hooves pounding the earth. The men of Thatcher's army poured in, from every direction. Josie fought like a storm, her gunshots ringing out with deadly precision, cutting down one attacker after another. Colt was beside her, his movements slower now but no less determined. He shot from the hip, his bullets finding their marks, each pull of the trigger a defiant statement. The battle raged on, the ranch becoming a battleground of fire and fury. Then through the chaos, Colt saw him. Thatcher, tall, cold, and dangerous, standing like a figure carved from stone, directing his men with the air of a man who had already won. Colt's heart pounded in his chest. The final fight had come. Josie saw him too, her eyes narrowing. She grabbed Colt's arm. It's time. Together, they moved toward Thatcher, their guns drawn. The tension in the air thickened. Then, with a single shot, the night erupted. Once again, Thatcher's eyes widened as the bullet whizzed past him. Colt and Josie fired in tandem, their shots pushing Thatcher and his men into retreat. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. As the first light of dawn broke, they stood together side by side. Their enemies were scattered and the land was theirs, but the cost was high. They had survived, but the future still loomed uncertain. And yet, in that moment together, they knew they had something more, something no one could take from them.